Hi everyone, and welcome back for part 2 of our first online story course run here at myengineerexchange.com. I'm Mark Brownlee, your instructor for the Mackerel Project Essentials course, and my bio and a bit of background on me we covered back in part 1, so I'm not going to repeat myself here. Instead, we'll jump right into part 2. But before we get out onto the rig next week with Dave, that's the SO BHP project engineer I worked with, and distill all the lessons from the disposal pile project, today we're going to talk about project context, which is really about how you can set yourself up for success. If there are any pilots out there, you'll know this is situational awareness. It's all about developing a total picture of the environment you're operating in. It's important for pilots, right? But as it turns out, it's just as critical for engineers. Why? Easy. Because that way you can understand and anticipate the decision-making process as the project moves through its life cycle. Now, every life cycle on big projects is like a roller coaster. I can tell you from experience, there are going to be good days, there are going to be not so good days, and there are going to be really ugly days. But understanding the project context, you can make adjustments to ensure all your functional, technical, and commercial requirements are fulfilled, and that's going to help you smooth out the ride. So you emerge at the end of the project a hero, and that's exactly what we're shooting for. Okay, so this is where you're going to be operating. X marks the spot. Nice simple Venn diagram that engineers are very familiar with. In the top left-hand corner, we've got you and your organisation. That's what we're calling internal. So that's all the noise and all the stuff going on in the company you're working for. Down the bottom, you've got the client organisation. Exactly the same sorts of things are happening in that company as well. So you're delivering the project for your company, and the client organisation has to ensure that they deliver the project for their stakeholders. Up in the top right-hand corner, which we're calling external, well, if you think about a public infrastructure project, for example, you're going to have things like governments and regulators and a whole bunch of other stakeholders. So your job happens right in the middle of all that noise. And you might be asking yourself, where does all the noise come from? What sort of stuff is going on in the organisations that you're working for, that your client is, and the external stakeholders represent? And the reality is, it's lots of stuff. Now, the two you're probably most familiar with on the screen are budget and time frames, but there's a whole bunch of other things that happen on big projects as well. You've got politics, whether they be internal politics or politics associated with government if the project is high profile. There are leadership issues, structure issues. Technologies are changing all the time. Depending where you're working in the world, sovereignty can be an issue, and so can law. There's also ego. There's a range of things you're going to come up against as a professional engineer. It's a really noisy environment. But to talk about the Mackerel project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify it for you. So it'll just be me representing Honeywell and Dave, the project engineer with SOBHP, representing the client. And right smack bang in the middle is where I'm going to have to deliver the disposal pile project on Mackerel. I'm going to look back to that project. The big constraint, the overwhelming project context, was around time. We had 36 hours. The rig was in shutdown. They were carrying out scheduled maintenance. And at the end of that 36 hours, Mackerel was going to restart, whether my code was working or not. So no pressure. We just had to deliver. No was not an option. Failure was not an option. But it actually gets worse than that, because if I go back to 1988, which is about the year this photo was taken, I could play the saxophone, sort of. What I couldn't do was chemical engineering in an industrial setting. I was just a graduate. That's all I was, a graduate who could play the saxophone, sort of. I knew nothing. But what I had done was demonstrated at Monash that I could learn. So I asked questions, millions of them. And I recall a presentation given by Dr. Rod Dry, one of our Monash lecturers in fourth year, who famously said that making an assumption is better than making no assumption at all. And that's what I've done throughout my career. I make assumptions and then I test them. And if the testing through questioning validates that assumption, I'll carry it forward. But if the testing through questioning makes that assumption null and void, I need another assumption to test. And that is what's going to get you through. Ask and test. Ask and test. Develop your hypotheses and then test them. But it gets worse, because I had zero industrial experience in oil and gas. Yeah, I'd done some vac work at wastewater treatment plants around Melbourne, but that was about it. So it's called starting from a zero base. I knew absolutely nothing. And when I look back and I think about it, while I didn't know anything, I wanted to know. So I had to let my natural curiosity loose. What I did and what I committed to doing was collect as many data points as I could from written sources, conversations, observations, and I made a point of writing it down or journalising. In fact, I even recall sketching a system diagram that connected the disposal pile on the rig to the sale of oil and gas products at the petrol station. And there's absolutely no doubt looking back, and as I looked forward then to another 30 years of professional engineering, that natural curiosity and a learning agility got me through. It actually doesn't get any better, because when you consider communications back in 1988, they weren't like they are today, especially in the middle of the ocean. So there was no cloud, there was no collaboration software. I had rolls and reams of paper, but I had no one to call. I just didn't have enough information. But what I learned subsequently is that you'll never have enough information. And to counter that, I had to change my philosophy. And that was to learn to ship, which is a word that's often associated these days in the startup community, but that's to get code out there, create and compile on a very regular basis at increasingly shorter intervals. That way I could test and refine on the go instead of waiting for perfect information, which I knew was never going to come. So if you make a habit of shipping and then iterating, you're going to have some very happy clients. Okay, the world got worse. I was 65 kilometres offshore, as you know. I was in 100 metres of water. I was the project. I was Honeywell. And there was absolutely no one coming to save me. It's a pretty lonely place, the middle of the ocean, for one of your first projects. And when I think back to that time on Mackerel, you've just got to back yourself. There really isn't a lot of choice. Now, whether it's karma, the universe, you've got to believe in something. It's whatever gets you through. You've just got to back yourself. And I developed a mantra. Yes, I can do this. That's what Monash had really trained me for. So backing myself wasn't a hard thing to do when I reflected on 4 years of chemical engineering and a penchant for process control. This is a place that I'd want to be. This is a place I'd trained for. And so I was happy to back myself in. I've spoken a little bit about this one, but time was absolutely not my friend. Once I got on that rig, I had 36 hours. I had plenty of time leading up to jumping on the chopper and flying out to Mackerel, but once I got there, 36 hours was all I had. Time was no friend of mine. And with that in mind, there was really a thought that went through my mind, which wasn't about time, it was about money. There are squillions of dollars washing through the capital markets every year, but there are only 24 hours in every day, and there always has been. No one's invented any more time, and it's unlikely anyone ever will. So what you have to do is get the planning right and make do. Life got even more miserable. The TDC system, the Honeywell distributed control system that I was coding, used SQL. I'd never coded SQL, and I'll let you into a little secret. Coding was never my strength anyway. So I was in a world of pain. But there was a way out. There was a way through. While it wasn't my gift, King in the software centre, it was his. This guy was a master. He was the guru, and he became my coding buddy. In fact, he was Mr. Efficiency. I recall that if it had taken me 100 lines of code to execute, then Ken could get that down to about 10. So he was an absolute rock star, and what it taught me was that partnerships are absolutely everything. Nothing meaningful is ever achieved alone. So there's some context. That was what I was up again as I flew out to Mackerel. I hope you've taken something away from that and you can shape that into an approach for your next project. What we're going to do next week is get out on the rig and we're going to start distilling some of these key project lessons. And the first one we're going to start with is trust. So it's everything. If you've got trust, you basically have everything. And it's about giving the client confidence that you're ready to take the pass. So I hope you've had fun today with project context, how to set yourself up for success. I hope you've learned something. If you've got any feedback, we're all at the usual places. I'd love to hear from you. And we look forward to seeing you next week where we get out on the rig and start to get into some of these heavy-duty lessons. Thanks for listening.